Witches have been part of human culture for thousands of years, though over time they've taken on many different forms. For centuries, witches were healers and midwives helping others in their communities. But by the 14th century, they'd become terrifying hags that cast spells, rode broomsticks, and sold their souls to the devil. But how did we get from covens to Salem? Welcome to the Complete History of Witches, Part 1. During prehistoric times, there was no such thing as a witch, at least not in the modern sense. There wasn't really magic or evil, just survival. Humans lived in tight-knit tribes, and everyone had to do what they could to help each other stay alive. Some people were better at healing, while others were better at hunting. But with the dawn of agriculture came a new concept: shamans. No longer were humans solely hunter-gatherers. They had more contact with one another, and some members of the community began taking on roles like healers and spiritual advisors. These shamans would use herbalism and knowledge of the human body to treat ailments, and when someone died, it was the shaman who guided them through the afterlife with rituals and prayers. This is where the concept of magic started to take root, since these practices seemed so mystical to the untrained eye. Shamans were believed to have special powers. As time went on, women began taking on the role of midwives, helping bring new life into the world. While men went off to war, it was the women who helped keep the community thriving. In ancient Greece around 800 BCE, the Oracle of Delphi was a woman who used her supposed powers to tell followers about their futures. And in Rome, the Vestal Virgins were priestesses dedicated to the service of the goddess Vesta. They oversaw the sacred fire in her temple and performed rituals to ensure the well-being of the city. In those days, it was all about community. Women held an important place in society and were often viewed as integral to its health and prosperity. But as time went on, things would change. In 64 CE, the Roman Empire burned down. Legend has it that a woman named Nero started the blaze because she wanted to build a new palace complex on the land. The disaster only fueled existing prejudices against women, and many started to be viewed as potential threats to society. But it would take another 1,000 years for this view to fully take hold. Back in Greece, Plato wrote about the dangers of female philosophers. His student Aristotle agreed and warned that women who studied philosophy would become mannish. You see, back then, it was believed that the female brain had less capacity than the male brain. To put it bluntly, they thought women weren't smart enough to handle the complexities of abstract thinking. In 93 CE, Pliny the Younger, a Roman writer, pleaded with the Emperor Trajan to stop women from practicing medicine. According to him, they were causing more harm than good and were endangering their patients. Though his request was denied, other Roman leaders would follow in his footsteps, starting with Emperor Septimius Severus. In 200 CE, he passed a law preventing women from continuing the practice of medicine. Midwives were exempt, but most healers were forced to shut down shop. Across Europe, women's roles in society shifted. Where once they were respected for their work, now they were looked down upon. It didn't matter if they were oracles, priestesses, or healers, they were becoming witches. Fast forward to the early 1400s, and something strange is happening. People are suddenly accusing their neighbors of being witches. What started as a fear of women became a full-blown panic. Between 1450 and 1750, the number of alleged witches being persecuted skyrocketed across Europe. Today, it's estimated that between 60 and 80,000 people were executed for witchcraft. But why? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some historians point to the collapse of feudalism. As society changed, people were looking for someone to blame, and they settled on witches. Others say there was a real increase in cases of witchcraft, citing medical texts that describe symptoms like seizures, vomiting, and hallucinations. These are symptoms of several disorders, including some that can be treated with modern medication. At the time, people didn't understand mental illness, so they accused Satan. After all, there were reports of witches holding festivals in the forest where they danced naked and worshipped the devil. Who knows what kind of craziness was going on in those woods? One thing's for sure, though. When people started getting accused of witchcraft, they didn't stand a chance. Men and women were tortured until they confessed to crimes they may or may not have committed. Sometimes the accusers wanted revenge. Other times it was just a way to get rid of someone who wasn't contributing to society. And let's face it, being a poor farmer in the 1400s wasn't exactly fun. So it's not hard to see why some people might jump at the chance to accuse their neighbor of being a witch. In 1484, 2 German monks published a book called The Hammer of the Witches, which detailed how to identify and punish witches. This guide was used throughout Europe, and the accusations began to spread like wildfire. Germany, Switzerland, and France were among the first countries to begin persecuting suspected witches. In 1562, Pope Pius V officially recognized the Devil's Sabbath and urged Catholics to find and report witches. King James V of Scotland was also on the hunt. In 1597, he published Demonology, in which he claimed that witches were conspiring to kill him. And, you guessed it, 3 women were put to death for their crimes. Over the next 50 years, an estimated 3,000 Scottish people were killed. So, what did these witches look like? The image we have today of a hunched-over old woman stirring a bubbling cauldron isn't too far off. According to the Malleus Maleficarum, witches were ugly, hairy, and smelled bad. However, they weren't always old. In fact, young girls were often targeted. After all, they had more freedom and were less likely to be believed if they were accused of witchcraft. But how were these witches finding their power? Once the witch craze took hold, almost every European country had their own version of a witch. In England, they were called wise women or cunning folk. They were mostly herbalists who used plants to treat common ailments like headaches and stomach aches. In France, they were known as sorcerers, and in Italy, they were called strigonas. Each country had its own name for witches, but they all shared one thing in common. They were feared. With so much fear floating around, it's no surprise that witches started hiding. That's when the stereotypes started to emerge. They weren't just ugly and hairy, they were also child killers and animal abusers. If anyone suspected you of being a witch, your best bet was to leave town before they figured out what you were up to. And when they found out, you'd probably end up dead. Now, before you think the worst of them, keep in mind that most of what we know about witches comes from people who wanted them gone. They created stories about what witches were doing to explain away their bizarre behavior. Who knows what really happened in those dark forests? But we'll never know for sure. In the end, most witches probably just wanted to live their lives in peace, helping their communities along the way. But thanks to the rumors spread by their accusers, they became monsters in the minds of the public. But what happened after that? Click here to watch Part 2 of the Complete History of Witches, where we'll explore how the hysteria surrounding witchcraft led to one of the most infamous trials in history. Or click here to watch one of these videos instead,